Defense ministers, military chiefs, high-ranking officials and experts from around the world are gathering in Beijing for the Xiangshan Forum, the Asia-Pacific's key annual security meeting. The Northeast Asia divide, post-arbitration wrangling, and the US rebalance continue to dominate the headlines, while the security architecture is in dire need of new ideas. How should we regard the future of the Asia-Pacific, through cooperation or confrontation? This is the Dialogue Special TV debate, coming to you from the Xiangshan Forum.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this year's Dialogue Special coming from the Xiangshan Forum. I'm Yang Rui. Today, we'll be discussing a wide range of issues and try to figure out whether we are moving toward confrontation or cooperation. Joining us here today are Yoichi Kato, Senior Research Fellow of the Rebuild Japan Initiative Foundation, Chong Ying-woo, Senior Advisor of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, Major General Yao Yunzhu from the Academy of Military Science of the PLA, Roy Kamphausen, Senior Vice President for Research and Director of the National Bureau of Asian Research, Vladimir Kozin, Chief Advisor of the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies, and Philip Stevens, Associate Editor of the Financial Times. We also have 7 challenges sitting in front of me. Now let's start from the section of questions.
My first question goes to Mr. Kamphausen. As we know that since the newly elected President Duterte came to power, he has said on many occasions that he wants to improve relations with China. Well, at the same time, we have seen that some frictions begin to surface between US and the Philippines. So I wonder, what's your assessment about the future trend of US, Philippine, and China relationship? And what's the impact of this development on the South China Sea situation? Thank you.
Several thoughts in response. First, the U.S. and Philippines have had a long-standing alliance relationship, and so there have been some tough times in the past, and I think we'll weather this time as well. That's the first part. The second, I don't represent the government, but the State Department spokesman said the United States welcomes stronger relations between the Philippines and both Russia and China, as well as any other countries it chooses to improve relations with. And so in that respect, I think the U.S. perspective is that this is a fine development. The third part is, how will this affect the tensions in the South China Sea? And interestingly, I would pose that perhaps the warming Philippine-China relations might actually lower tensions, in that it reduces the incentives for China to take further provocative actions against either Scarborough Shoal or Second Thomas Shoal. So in some respects, as distasteful as the rhetoric has been from the new Philippines president, it might actually serve a stabilizing purpose in the region.
I want to ask a question and shift attention from the south to the north. So I have a question to Mr. Chong Ying-woo. Do you think that sanctions and deterrence are enough to bring stability to the Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Well, it depends on what kind of sanctions. I think the utility of sanctions is to give incentives to North Korea to denuclearize through diplomacy. So the role of sanctions is to strengthen the hand of diplomacy. And if North Korea is going to come back to the six-party talks or any dialogue for the purpose of denuclearization, we have to change the strategic calculus of North Korea beforehand. And sanctions, the current sanctions will not do the job, but depending on what kind of sanctions the Security Council decides to adopt, and how any loopholes in the new Security Council resolution are complemented by unilateral sanctions by other stakeholders. I hope that it can change the strategic calculus of North Korea to convince North Korean leaders that nuclear weapons do not make North Korea more secure, but it has to pay a prohibitive price that could even erode the stability of the regime. We hope that deterrence will work, but I don't think the usual deterrence that is applicable to all other countries, all other nuclear weapon states, between US, Russia, between US, China, deterrence on the basis of mutually assured destruction has worked and will continue to work. Deterrence could very well fail, and Republic of Korea's national security policy, including deployment of offensive and defensive assets, is all on the basis of assumption that deterrence is likely to fail with North Korea.
Denuclearization as well as stability both get prioritized on the agenda of the Chinese government. Now, do you think the countermeasure of deploying THAAD missile shield program in the ROK will work in this correct direction?
Of course not, because THAAD system, as interpreted by Chinese experts, are not very effective in protecting ROK, in protecting Republic of Korea. It might be effective to protect Japan and the United States from a future possible nuclear strike capability from North Korea, but also from China, but not effective. It's not an effective system to protect South Korea. So China is very strongly opposed to the deployment of THAAD, not only because of this reason, but also because the underlying destruction of the strategic stability between China, Russia, and the United States.
Nuclear deterrence will never work. It will put your opposite number into the corner. It will create suspicion, hatred, and responsive measures. Especially when we are witnessing that the US Air Force sent heavy strategic bombers like B-52H Hotel and B-2 Alpha Spirit to the very close to the demilitarized zone and from the sea, especially when the United States still are subscribed to no first use subscribed to the first use, for the first use of nuclear weapons, including versus North Korea, because it has been listed in a classified nuclear warfighting plans of the United States of America. Russia being the first one, the People's Republic of China the second, Iran, North Korea, etc., etc. We have already experienced sanctions from the West, unjustifiably imposed upon us because of Crimean case and Donbass case. Those sanctions have united us, Russians, against the United States of America and NATO. It also created a kind of suspicion and mistrust between Washington, Brussels, NATO headquarters. The best solution is to overcome this stalemate over denuclearizing of Korean Peninsula is to make a very tiny, small initial step. The West should cease large-scale naval and air force maneuvers involving tens of thousands of troops. Probably Pyongyang will reciprocate. The tougher you are against North Korea, the tougher will be response. In this case, I would like to recall a famous saying borrowed from Ronald Reagan presidency. People mistrust each other because they arm, and people arm because they mistrust each other. So vicious circle. You are collecting negative potential. You are creating a lot of suspicion and mistrust. And, sorry, whether do you like it or not, you are encouraging North Korea to be nuclearized.
I'd like to challenge the whole basis of this discussion so far, because I think the people watching this program won't be terribly interested in the very sort of detailed descriptions of deterrence, offensive or defensive, about THAAD missiles or precise. What they will wonder, I think, as an outsider, is they will say, look, the interests of China and the United States on the Korean Peninsula are the same. Neither country wants a nuclear-armed North Korea. President Xi Jinping has made that very clear. President Obama has made that very clear. So, why don't these two countries, the two great powers in today's world, think about finding a way to achieve the common goal, rather than arguing about the details of whether the THAAD missiles are to defend against China or North Korea. And I think it's, I'm going to come back to our first challenger who said, look, you know, if now the Philippines is getting friendly with China, can it still be friendly with the US? And for me, I think, and this is with the looking at the experience of Europe at the beginning of the 20th century, the only way that you can have peace in this region is if countries like the Philippines or Vietnam or Japan can have friendly relations with both of the world's great powers in this region. So there's my, I'm afraid, challenge to this conversation.
But on that, I didn't have a chance to respond to the objections, because I just wanted to say that regardless of what positions our neighbors take, this is fundamentally a sovereign right of the Republic of Korea to defend itself against nuclear-armed North Korea. We know that North Korea's nuclear threat is real, clear, and present. And I don't recognize, and no one in Korea would recognize the right of any other country to deny the sovereign right to defend ROK and protect 50 million lives in the Republic of Korea against North Korea's real nuclear threat. So the best way to obviate need for THAAD, or even to withdraw THAAD in the end, would be by successfully denuclearizing North Korea, because THAAD deployment is a corollary of failure to denuclearize North Korea. And all partners in six-party talks, they share the responsibility.
Well, you know, the biggest challenge that this entire region has, especially in terms of the relationship among the major powers, is lack of strategic trust. What China and the United States can do together in a positive way to the region, I think North Korea is the biggest opportunity.
Thank you very much. Vladimir, do you think it's Russia and China that should work together to live up to the expectation of Seoul in delivering the strong message to the DPRK?
Yeah, I think that we could both encourage Seoul and Pyongyang to show restraint in military might, and especially as a starting point to cease informational activity, to put it bluntly, propaganda warfare in mass media versus each other. It will be much better, it will ameliorate the climate and restore, not greatly, but nevertheless, trust, the atmosphere of trust. And certainly there should be reciprocal measures from Pyongyang and Seoul, and from Pyongyang and Washington to commit themselves not to just exercise military might, like launching ballistic missiles, like exploding nuclear devices, like not sending strategic heavy bombers and ceasing large-scale military maneuvers and exercises. But how to encourage whom? Who will be the first? You could ask me. The strongest side should make a first step forward, not the weakest.
Roy, your chance.
The United States really ought to consider a brand new style of diplomacy as it pertains to North Korea. I think that's encouraging. It's matched on the other side, though, by those calling for very tough, even tougher sanctions and even more deterrence. And so those two somehow have to be figured out over time.
Victoria, one more question from the young scholars here.
Thank you. So you've been all talking so far about really deadly things, really something that can set the world on fire, Korean Peninsula, and probably interactions like how Filipino president's warmer relations with China can influence. But I think this is a question to all of you. Do you think this is the kind of the root cause of the problem of the Asia-Pacific, or would you look deep into it? What actually, in your view, poses the biggest threat to Asia-Pacific order? What realm does it lie in? Is it some country or some system or group of countries or whoever else wanting to have preferable positions over the others? Or is it some kind of systemic deficiencies in Asia-Pacific region? And if the problems that are caused as a result of, this systemic breach actually causes the problems of the regional or global level. And in addition, with the dessert for Philip, how you see the role, with all those questions relevant for you as well, of Great Britain and all of that after Brexit and the change of government and its, AIIB entrance counter to US wishes. Thank you.
So I start with...
Yes, Philip,
I'll start with Britain and Brexit, because that's an easy one. Sometimes nations do really stupid things. And Britain has just done a really stupid thing by trying to leave its own continent and thereby diminishing its own political and economic power. So that's straightforward. I think on your question about where's the real tension in this region, the tension arises, for me, from the fact that the geopolitical facts have changed. In East Asia, for a long time, America was the preeminent power. China was, relatively speaking, weak. We now have a strong China, seeing for itself a global role, and obviously seeking primacy, if you like, in its own regions, because that's what great powers do when they emerge. So you have this collision between China's ambitions and the US view that things have been fine up to now, so why should we change them?
So practically you are saying a geopolitical rivalry of the 19th century type in Asia-Pacific?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing.
In fact, in the Asia-Pacific area, in my understanding, there are 4 major areas where we have a conflict or potential friction and conflict between the United States and China. The divided Korean Peninsula, Diaoyu Island, Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea. I wonder if anyone from the young scholars here sitting in front of me can raise a question and direct your question to one of the panelists here.
Alessio, I have actually a question because I wanted to try to widen the discussion. We've been very much focused on the US and China relations, but I think across Northeast Asia in particular, we've got a number of relationships that are quite important. Coming to one of the questions you raised about the East China Sea and the territorial maritime disputes. I think there is a very interesting moment in the Japan-China relations. They have been going through definitely 2012, 2014, a period of rocky relationship. But it seems to me now that there is the beginning of a renewed sort of, from both sides, attempt to increase the dialogue and put in place a number of communication mechanisms to allow for the two sides to avoid unintended consequences to frequent encounters that happen at sea. So my question to Mr. Kato and General Yao, what is your expectation in terms of the future of Sino-Japanese relations on the back of what we've discussed so far as a changing dynamics between the United States and China, and therefore sort of the regional balance. Thank you.
Shall I answer immediately? Yes, I think the China-Japanese relations is also a very one of the most important bilateral relations, and it has been in the low for the last 4 years. It has been at the lowest, almost at the lowest, since the two countries established diplomatic relations. Starting from the end of 2014, we have seen a slow upward path that China-Japan relations is improving very slowly, but it's improving. And there have been several rounds of talks on establishing what you described as CBM measures, including setting up of hotlines, setting communication, and also rules of the road between the navies, the coast guards, and the air forces, and also regular dialogue mechanisms. So I think that the general trend is to improve the relations, but we still have many issues. The most recent issue is that Japanese government official, high-ranking official, have made a remark at CSIS in DC, Washington DC, saying that Japanese Navy would like to join the training cruise jointly with the United States, and we still want a clarification on that.
One more question from the
Let me
gentleman sitting
come in
next to
here.
Victoria.
We are talking about future of Asia. Let me bring here India in. India and China have their mutual concerns about maritime security issues, increasing India's influence in South China Sea, as well as Chinese increasing presence in Indian Ocean. Recently, both the countries have started maritime security dialogue, but it's very basic. What would be your suggestion to increase maritime cooperation between India and China?
Actually, I don't see much conflict of interest in maritime areas so far as China and India are concerned. We have a border dispute, and we have maybe an issue on our relationship with Pakistan. Pakistan has been an all-weather partner for China, but a Pakistan-Indian relationship is complex. So I think so far we don't have much conflict, conflict, and we are already having kind of a navy joint navy operations in the Gulf of Aden, and to protect sea lanes of communication under the UN mandate. And I think if we are going to expand it, we can have HADR, we can have search and rescue, and also maritime environmental protection.
Japan promised to join the joint patrol in the South China Sea. President Duterte promised to beat a retreat from the joint patrols. Now, do you think China could go as far as to accept the alleged joint patrols by Australia, Japan, and the United States in the South China Sea?
China has persistently said it will not accept the arbitration result. So whatever the other countries' players say, it has no effect. It will have no impact on China's position.
Now, do you think, excuse me, Yoich, do you think the Japanese government will go ahead, despite the fact that President Duterte, the newly elected leader of the Philippines, refuses to be held hostage by the maritime dispute in the South China Sea and wants to come to China as an official, a state visit, the highest level of treatment by the PRC. And under this circumstance, Tokyo still wants to go ahead at the risk of undermining seriously the already very fragile Japan-China relationship.
First, I have to correct what you said, that Japan promised to joint patrol, to conduct a joint patrol in South China Sea. I think you are referring to the statement by the Defense Minister Inada, but what she said was not that she promised to conduct a joint patrol with the United States in South China Sea, but she just said that Japan will continue to exercise joint training, naval joint training with the United States in South China Sea, which is not new. You know, in terms of naval activities in South China Sea.
But actually, she used the term joint training cruise in South China Sea.
Yes, there has been already done a number of joint cruise, including what we call Pacific Partnership, which is a humanitarian purpose to, deliver, provide medical services to the countries in the region. But it's totally different from freedom of navigation operations, FONOPS. Japan does not have any plan at all to conduct the FONOPS along with the United States in South China Sea. Because if Japan conducts the FONOPS in South China Sea, it's been perceived in Japan that PLA Navy will conduct similar operations around Senkaku. And then that will cause Japan to call what we call maritime security patrol, which requires Japanese maritime self-defense force to also go into the 12 nautical miles from Senkaku, and that will present a possibility where Chinese Navy ship and Japanese maritime self-defense force cruise side by side and could cause a crash. That's the last thing Japan wants. So Japan will never, at this moment at least, Japan doesn't have any plan at all to conduct the FONOPS.
I think
China doesn't have to worry about it.
Japan should be afraid of Chinese PLA Navy conducting freedom of navigations not in Diaoyu Island, but in Okinawa territory waters, your territory waters around Okinawa.
Okay, I'm concerned now.
Because FONOPS is not only in disputed islands, it's in established territory waters.
Okay, a question. One more question from the young scholars here in front of me. Aloy.
Yeah. Because the Philippines and President Duterte are mentioned many times in this discussion, I am forced to say something. First, the international arbitration. It is only binding between the Philippines and China. But because China rejects the result of the arbitration, President Duterte is pursuing a more pragmatic approach to handle the situation, because this arbitration decision is not self-enforcing. We cannot enforce it alone. We need the cooperation of China. So we want to repair damaged political ties with China in order to advance our interests in the area, because of the realization that the Philippines cannot advance its interests if China remains to be adversarial to the Philippines. So we need to repair these damaged political ties, and that will be done in his visit to Beijing next week. And what Philip said is music to my ear, and that is to see the Philippines being friends to both superpowers. And I think that is good for the region. But I would like to ask Roy, since in theory, the essence of the alliance is always directed at a common threat, since we are befriending China, we're losing a threat. So do you think that will call for a rethinking of the security alliance, since we want to befriend China and we cannot afford to treat China as an adversary? So do you think that will call for a rethinking of the alliance? And to Dr. Kato, what do you think about this, that there is really a seriousness on the part of the current government to pursue friendlier, warmer ties with China, and at the same time, embrace this friendship with Japan? So are you happy to see the Philippines having these warm ties with China and rethinking the alliance with the United States?
The U.S.-Philippines alliance well predates the emergence of China as a military power. And so I think it'd be mistaken to say that it exists to contain or defend against China. Is there a need to reevaluate the basis on which it exists? I think that probably is worthwhile, and a new American administration may well undertake that initiative. It's important to note at the outset, I also noted that the United States does not mind important and strengthened relations, does not oppose, in fact encourages the emergence of stronger Philippine-China ties, as well as Philippines-Russia.
Right.
So,
it seems we hear more tough voices from the Pentagon and less voices from the State Department or those think tanks that call for peace and stability. Is this true? I mean, do you think the White House in the second term of the Obama administration has been held hostage by the hawkish concerns from the military?
No, but I think your first statement is worth understanding and analyzing. The State Department has been very involved, but a lot of its priorities have been in the Middle East. And so it's not to say it's disengaged from the region, but if you were to look at the level of activity that Secretary Kerry has been involved in, the vast majority have
Secretary
been.
Ashton Carter says recently that the pivot to Asia has entered into the third stage. What does that mean, Vladimir?
It would mean that the number of SSBNs and the number of SSGNs, strategic submarine ballistic nuclear in the first case, and strategic submarine guided nuclear, guided cruise missiles, will be much higher than in the Atlantic Ocean. The number of BMDS installations of the United States will be proportionally higher than in Western Europe or in the Atlantic Ocean, I mean on board Aegis-capable ships. But I would like to ask a question. Probably it would be quite unusual thing, but I would like to ask a question to our esteemed colleagues. How many military bases the United States of America has in Japan and in South Korea? Because you know your land much better than me. Could you please reveal this state secret for the audience? And I will ask... okay, sorry?
How many military bases do you have in Japan?
Maybe,
that are supported by the United States?
I really don't have the statistics right now.
Nearly 100, sir.
Let's say a lot.
I will tell you. Nearly 100.
It's a lot.
Combined.
So
tell the exact figure.
It's a lot.
So what's wrong with it?
Tell the exact figure.
What's wrong? Let me ask you a question. Fundamentally, by the end of the day, who is the enemy of your Japan-US security pact? Who is the enemy? Now, if you, with the end of the Cold War, Russia and China are the enemy of your treaty military alliance,
whoever intends and actually does invade Japan will be, or pose a threat to Japan.
But at the same time, in sharp contrast, Moscow and Beijing have made it very clear over and over that we would have a strategic partnership instead of a military alliance. In sharp contrast, you guys have the military alliance, a legacy of the Cold War. Does it mean that you have the Cold War mentality?
I don't think Japanese government has ever stated that either China or Russia is enemy of Japan. I don't think so. I think that's a total misunderstanding or your anticipation.
Go ahead with your question.
A quick question for Roy Kamphausen. Brought up the issue of the upcoming U.S. election. I'm wondering, with respect to the South China Sea and the positive developments that we've seen in the region, at least in the short term, in terms of China-Philippine dialogue and also some of the agreements reached between ASEAN and China, what advice you'd have for the next administration in terms of how it should undertake its South China Sea policy and the extent to which there might be changes from what the Obama administration is doing?
There's a fundamental rethink of many elements of U.S. national strategy, and so I've got to believe that reevaluating the approach that the United States has taken over the last several years in the South China Sea would be one of those dimensions. Without predicting a winner, one of the candidates was actually the principal author of the so-called pivot or rebalance. And so were she to become president, I suspect that there would be a lot of continuity, even in the case of a reevaluation. What has changed, of course, in the intervening years are a number of factors. The reclamation of islands and emplacement of, in some cases, military assets on some of those. It's not a very large number. I think we need to be fair and understand that the number of islands is really a fraction of those in the rest of the Spratlys. But the other thing that's changed is the arbitral ruling and the changing relations between several of the countries and the work on the code of conduct. All of this has to fit together into a coherent whole, and I'm pretty confident that a new administration would do that.
Liu Lin, your question. Go ahead.
In fact, this is a follow-on question about the U.S.-Philippine alliance. Because I noticed that, in fact, it seems that the U.S. Influence or control of its alliance partner seems to be decreasing. Sometimes the alliance partners will do something that the U.S. is unexpected, such as the Duterte's policy judgment and things like that. Even Japan, I think, they are doing, maybe they are strengthening U.S.-Japan alliance, but they are doing this also out of their own interest, I think. So how do you manage the military alliance nowadays? I wonder. If Duterte continues his policy trend, will the U.S. just wait and see and do nothing, or the U.S. will do something to save this alliance relationship? Because as I see, the Philippines is a very important strategic partner for the U.S., especially in carrying out the rebalance to Asia policy.
The way America's alliances work is not that Washington issues orders and the alliance partners do what they're told. That's not how it works. And I'd ask our two representatives from Japan and South Korea to offer their perspectives. What security specialists in China and elsewhere don't recognize is the enormous amount of time and effort that's involved in alliance management. These are essential relationships for the United States, and the amount of engagement with alliance partners is just difficult to imagine how much it involves. Think, for example, at the Shangri-La Dialogue this year, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, in a quickly or recently modified speech, failed to mention our alliance partner in the Republic of Korea. Mr. Chun can talk to the turmoil that caused within Seoul and elsewhere. It was completely inadvertent. It was not intentional. It was not trying to convey a message to Seoul. It was a speech that was rewritten at the last minute, and you could say carelessly, and that would maybe not be wrong, but in any case, it was a mistake. Countries that don't have those kind of relationships don't have to worry about somehow carelessly insulting an alliance partner and then having to make it up.
Vladimir?
Yeah. Why some nations, some countries are debating this idea of a South China Sea, artificial islands, etc., etc.? Because of quite a simple thing. They would like to create inferiority complex inside the People's Republic of China, inside the leadership of the People's Republic of China. Because it's very easy to manipulate a country who is being sent in the corner and is supposed to justify its position, its stance.
Thank you very much. General Yao, you'll be the last to bring this wonderful panel discussion to a close.
Yeah, and I know I have only 1 minute. I think that Victoria had raised a very good question. That is, what is the most important thing to do to address the security concerns of all the relevant parties in this region? I think the most important thing to address is the strategic architecture. Leaders of great powers should go beyond their bilateral issues and look forward and invest more in long-term interest, in longer-term interest. And currently, this strategic, the security architecture in Asia-Pacific were featured by U.S. military alliances, the 5 U.S. military alliances. And I hope the next president herself or himself would spend more time in considering how to bring China into this already existing security architecture, which had for decades excluded China. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I believe we have all been able to benefit enormously from the dynamics of this wonderful and fruitful brainstorming session, a very important part of the conclusion of the Xiangshan Forum here in Beijing. I thank you again for your participation, your wisdom and time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.